Hello and welcome to Kingston Now. I'm Jimmy Buff. This week we're going to talk about preserving land and more in the city of Kingston with Rebecca Martin, Executive Director of the Kingston Land Trust. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Jimmy.
So when did the Kingston Land Trust get started?
The Kingston Land Trust started in 2008. It was co-founded by Steve Noble, who works for the city of Kingston and the Forsyth Nature Center, and Arthur Zakowitz, who is a community educator. And back then, it was a very grassroots situation. We had a very small crew, and it's turned into a really wonderful organization that's helping to benefit the citizens in Kingston.
It's a much more varied organization than I thought it was. When you say land trust, you think preserving land, but there's so much more that you guys do. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, we do, of course, preserve land in our mission areas, the city of Kingston, town of Ulster, and city of Kingston. But we also like to say that we connect people to places. So in a city, as an urban trust, there's a lot of programming to create stewardship, ultimately, to bring people out to the park system and to vacant parcels that we might acquire, to envision ways to use them, as I said, in a way that benefits the city and the citizens. Ultimately, the land trust, we hope, will always exist, but if we can build citizen support and engagement, then the odds of the land being protected for generations, we think, are greater.
How did you get involved? Your background is as a singer, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a musician, but I moved to Kingston in 2002. I had a child in 2005, and it just turned me right around. And I prior to that, had been moving quite a bit with my work. When Charlie came, I started to really see Kingston, because I would walk and be out and about with him. And I became active and started KingstonCitizens.org, which was a platform to help citizens get to know their wards, their aldermen, and to try to develop a relationship between the citizens and their council members. And that just led me down the road to this place so many projects later. And I was hired in 2010 as a full-time staff member at the Kingston Land Trust. Prior to that, I was a board member and started a garden movement in the city. And that's really how it all began.
What was the garden movement? Was it for people to build gardens in their own yards, or was it bigger than that?
Well, it started out, there was a group of citizens who tried to put a community garden into one of the city of Kingston's park system. They were looking at Cornell Park, and they were running into some roadblocks. With the city, there was not a real understanding of how that would all work. When I came on board with the Land Trust, I was given gardens as my committee. It was delegated to me. And so I decided to do a home garden movement to avoid liability resources, just to get people planting and to come up with an interesting way to promote that. So we started the Kingston Victory Garden movement, and Mayor Satile allowed us to put an 8-by-8 foot raised bed on the lawn of City Hall, and that was sort of the pillar project that helped us to really get the word out. And that's really where it all began for me.
Some of the other incredible projects that you guys have been involved with include the African American Cemetery on South Wall Street. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. When I first started my position, I lived down in the Rondout, so I would drive home a lot by taking Wilbur Avenue, and I would pass this site and had no idea what it was, and was very curious about it. So it was one of the first projects that I actually brought to the board, and wondering what it was, and we organized the tour, and we had about 40 people come, including the city historian, Ed Ford. We had members from the Veterans Association who had been maintaining the cemetery site for decades. We had important African American leaders in the community come, and it just occurred to me, and it's a local landmark, it's protected locally, but we wanted to up the ante and really get it recognized on the state level through SHPO. And so we started an African American History Committee to help us with this process, and through that we were able to identify 2 other significant sites. I mean, there's so many in the city of Kingston. African American history here is wonderfully rich and not that well documented, or at least not all well pulled together. There's documentation, but to create something cohesive that you can look a map or some sort of a way to see and to go and to for the average person to go and really take advantage of learning about the history there. We started this process, and so currently we're working on, we're pretty much complete in documenting the Mount Zion African American burial ground, which is on South Wall. There's a African American cemetery on Pine Street, which was a slave cemetery. The Mount Zion site is a free slave cemetery. And then the AME Zion Church on Franklin Street, which is the oldest African American church in the county. So we're submitting all 3 in 2012 with the help of this rich committee and partnerships with people like Friends of Historic Kingston and Transart, and others who are very, very important.
And the Mount Zion Cemetery also houses remains of veterans from the Civil War, is that correct?
Yeah, the 20th Regiment soldiers. There's quite a few buried up there. So it's very significant, the cemetery, and it's just beautiful. And we organized a rededication ceremony this past summer.
And during that, something extraordinary happened. We'll talk about that in just a moment. You're watching Kingston Now. Next, we'll be joined by Tim Weidemann, member of the Kingston Land Trust Board of Directors and member of the Rail Trail Committee. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Kingston Now. This week we're looking at preserving land and space in Kingston, and joining us is Tim Weidemann, member of the Kingston Land Trust Board of Directors and member of the Rail Trail Committee, and once again Executive Director Rebecca Martin. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
Now we're going to get to the rail trails in just a moment because that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. But first I wanted to finish the story we were talking about before the break about the Mount Zion Cemetery. And after the incredible work you guys did there was this great grand opening. Is that, how would you describe it? Ceremony?
It was a rededication.
Rededication.
Of the cemetery.
And prior to that, you had been in contact with the people at the Old Dutch Church in Kingston. How were they involved in this?
Well, I got a call from one of their elders, Rob Sweeney, who's a historian and newly eldered over there. And he wanted to, he was on the list for the committee, so he was receiving all of the communications. And he asked what the Dutch Church might do to help support the rededication ceremony. And we asked for if perhaps they might be willing to make an apology, and a formal apology to the African American community in Kingston for their role in slavery. And they did it. It was a reconciliation letter, which we have up on our site. Our site is good because you can scroll down to the right-hand side and see what project we're working on is of interest, and you can see the work that has taken place. So the letter of reconciliation is there, and the Dutch Church came, read it to the committee, which was very powerful, and asked if they could also present it at the rededication ceremony. So it was definitely more than I could have imagined, and I think everybody felt that way.
Must have been a powerful moment.
It
because
was.
At the rededication were families of people who were buried in the cemetery as well, the community.
Yes, it was a really wonderful extension, and and I hope that the committee continues to do great work. I'm sure it will.
One of the other things that the Kingston Land Trust does is you're working on rail trails.
That's right.
And for people who don't know what a rail trail is, maybe you can give a description, Tim.
Sure. Broadly speaking, any pathway that's intended for use for joggers, walkers, skiers, bikers, rollerbladers, the whole gamut.
And they're built on abandoned rail beds. Railroads used to crisscross Ulster County. A few shows ago we had the authors of a book about railroads in Ulster County. And there's all this abandoned rail bed that is just sitting there unused.
Yeah, that's right. And it's rail beds, but there's also connections across streets and in other open spaces, which makes it a pertinent project for the Land Trust, looking at preserving open space and land in the city of Kingston. And so, yeah, the city of Kingston was a hub for transportation and for the overall community of Ulster County at one point. And there's a crisscrossing of railroad beds here that makes it an ideal place to develop some rail trails.
Well, a lot of people may know about the rail trail that is off of 209, Route 209, just south of Kingston.
Yep.
And is there a plan to connect to that? What is the plan for rail trails in Kingston?
That's the beautiful thing here is that, as most people know, there's rail trails throughout Ulster County and then up and down the Hudson Valley. But what's missing in a lot of cases is the connections that links up 10-mile trails, 7-mile trails to create longer 50, 60-mile trails that can really create regional attractions. And Kingston is kind of that missing hub. We've got the O&W trail that goes down through the Rondout Valley. We've got the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail that comes right up now to the city boundary. And the hope is that we can figure out ways to connect those together in the city of Kingston and then build a greater presence regionally for rail trails that promotes tourism, gets people here, gets the people who are here doing healthy activities, all that good stuff.
And for anyone who has ever been on a rail trail, you stand on one and you just think, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This is exactly what this should be used for now.
Yeah.
I can ride my bike, I can run, I can push a baby in a baby jogger,
Right.
I can take my dogs out.
Yep.
So it's perfect.
There's lots of benefits. It's a great thing, yeah.
What's involved in converting a rail bed to a rail trail?
Sure. Well, there's a lot, and it depends on the rail bed and the situation. But I think the first challenge and the challenge that we're facing and tackling now is figuring out the ownership of the old rail beds. So that's a big challenge, and lots of communities face that challenge as they start this process. So we're working on identifying who are the owners of these rail beds, and then what do we need to do in order to figure out a way to partner with those owners in order to develop a rail trail. And I think sometimes it takes really educating people about the benefits of these trails and educating them, to relieve some of the fears that come along with rail trails. I think people sometimes associate, rail trails with people coming through their backyards or other challenges like that. And the experience that overwhelmingly people say after they've developed rail trails is that they're a real benefit to the community. And so we need to educate people about that benefit.
Is there old rail? Is there actually old rail and ties and stuff on the bed that has to be cleaned up
Yeah.
and pulled up, and garbage that's been dumped for
Right.
eons? Yeah.
In some cases, yeah. So in particular, we've been doing a lot of work over this past year, starting to look at a stretch of the old Ulster and Delaware rail line that extends from around Kingston Point down in the Rondout up through Ponkhockey and then into Midtown. And that bed was abandoned with the rail still in place and ties still in place. The Trolley Museum of New York right now has a lease on that property, and so we've been working with them to figure out the best way to make it a usable asset. And that's, I think, the key here is that, the Kingston Land Trust, as its name implies, is taking assets that are maybe underutilized in the city of Kingston and try to figure out ways to make the best and highest use of those assets. And having lived right up the hill from this stretch of the Ulster and Delaware line for years and not even know that it was there, I think it's important that we figure out a way to use these resources that are sitting there at this point unused.
If Kingston can connect outward to the existing trails, eventually, someday, they all will run right to the walkway over the Hudson and to New York City. Mm-hmm. It would be really to our benefit to do the work that's necessary to make that possible for Kingston.
And you actually have an ally too in the incoming mayor, Shane Gallo, who has been on this program a couple times talking about how much he is in favor of extending the rail trail system in Kingston. So
he's
that's a good ally
very
to have.
supportive, and maybe you'll join our rail trail committee too.
As an avid user of rail trails, you can pencil me in as a member of whatever you need to do.
Thank you, Jimmy.
This is Kingston Now. We've got more with Rebecca Martin and Tim Weidemann of the Kingston Land Trust next. You're watching Kingston Now, and we've been talking land and open space in the city of Kingston with Rebecca Martin and Tim Weidemann of the Kingston Land Trust. Rebecca, let's talk about urban farms. It's one of the things that you guys have done, and it's just such an extraordinary concept of a farm in the middle of a city. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, years ago when we started the City Hall Victory Garden, I got a call from a farmer at the time, Jessica Pascal was her name, and she was the head farmer at Phillies Bridge, and she offered her services as a consultant to the project that we had started. So I met her then, and that was, 2007-ish. In this process, I was offered a piece of land on South Pine Street, which was donated by Binny Water Ice, with water included. It was an incredible opportunity.
You mean like in a little pond or something?
No, free water. We could use their
water.
water source
Great,
to water a garden. And it was one of the things I have to stress, we love partnerships, because that way we can help to connect with our community, and also everybody brings something to the table. It's like stone soup. So I was able to contact Diane Reeder at the Queen's Galley, and we started a community garden, children's garden, that was really getting a slow start. And during this process, Jessica called, who had just gotten married and was moving to Kingston, and her name became Jessica Clark, her married name, and she was looking for 10 acres. And at this point, I was working at the Land Trust as the executive director, and I had a 1/4 acre, and I convinced her to give this a try, to use this as an example of what can happen in an urban setting and creating a farm, and she agreed. And we were so fortunate because she is an amazing farmer and also very interested in the community, and is so she got going, and it was with the Queen's Galley, Binny Water, and the Kingston Land Trust, and she started grooming the site last fall. And this year we've had a huge successful year. So she grew 137 varieties of food.
Wow.
She
on
fed
a 1/4 acre.
On a 1/4 acre
Wow.
of land. She fed the Queen's Galley all summer long. A lot of the produce went there. She started a farm-to-table program, so a lot of the restaurants that we eat at in Kingston are purchasing vegetables from the farm.
From right in Kingston.
From right in Kingston.
Wow, that's awesome.
She launched a Midtown urban farm stand, so she's selling her vegetables to the community 3 days a week. And I hired her as the coordinator for a program we started called the Dig Kids, which was in partnership with Kingston Cares and Family of Woodstock at the Everett Hodge Center on Franklin Street, right around the corner from here. And we hired 5 youth to farm the front of the Everett Hodge all summer under her guidance. So they worked with a farmer all season long. It was incredible. We had a great year. And we're expanding this year. She's building a greenhouse too. The Dig Kids is expanding to 8 youth to be paid. And the Urban Agriculture Committee is going to launch in January. And it's really my aim and the Land Trust's aim to try to help to develop more along the lines of urban agriculture in the city of Kingston and town of Ulster.
It'd be amazing to see what she could have done with 10 acres.
Well,
wow.
Well, I think what she's showing us is the possibilities. We know that on 10 acres you can grow a lot of food, but on a 1/4 acre, it really, I think, has been a great model for a community at this time. Certainly, urban agriculture is as old as the hills, but we're envisioning it now based on what we have as assets and using those assets in creative ways to really get people thinking a lot about how they can produce their own food too in these times, changing times.
I saw on your website you had a holiday mixer at the Stockade Tavern, and that the bartender there was making a special Kingston Land Trust drink with wheatgrass grown. Lemongrass grown.
Wheatgrass, now that's a good one.
Yeah, that would be a little sour. But
No, that would be good. Yes, we used,
Yeah.
we just had our annual mixer
Let's talk about fundraising. Yeah, tell us about that aspect of it.
Well, one of our generous donors has given us a match challenge where every dollar is matched up to $5,000, and we're halfway there. And we would love the public support in helping us to reach that goal that would go towards our general fund. And all of the information is on the main page of the Kingston Land Trust website, which is KingstonLandTrust.org. And I appreciate that because we also are trying to reach out to the community at large. As much as we're out there, there's no end to communicating and trying to bring more of the community to the table. And we have all of these committees because we have such a diverse and rich community. So we're trying to appeal to as many of the folks here as we can.
Well, it's a terrific amount of projects and the things that you've done in such a short time, the Kingston Land Trust, it's really, really remarkable.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's show. We'd like to thank Rebecca Martin, Executive Director of the Kingston Land Trust, and Tim Weidemann, member of the Kingston Land Trust Board of Directors and member of the Rail Trail Committee. You can find out more about them and upcoming activities at KingstonLandTrust.org or on Facebook. For Kingston Now, I'm Jimmy Buff. I'll see you next time.